We've all heard of Postman, right? But did you know it could do this? A few weeks ago, I posted this video talking about an awesome feature inside of Postman called Postman Flows, and a bunch of you liked it, and some of you asked for a bit more. Are you ready? Let's go. Postman Flows is a low-code tool that enables developers to design and run data pipelines and API workflows. That sounds a bit complicated, right? Essentially, Postman Flows enables us to use a visual interface to build applications that interact with APIs, which makes the software design process so much easier. And that sounds fantastic. But why is it useful? I mean, it's just a flowchart, right? Not exactly. You see, one of the great advantages that Postman Flows has as a software design tool is that you already have access to all of your APIs that you're working with inside of Postman. And Postman's public API network enables you to utilize a wide variety of third-party APIs in just a few clicks. So you're able to create a new workflow in just a few minutes instead of a few hours. So picture it as an interactive flowchart that you can actually run and test, as well as implement your existing APIs, making the design process so much faster. Let's take a look at an example flow, and then I'll show you how to build your own. So this is one of the examples that you can find within Postman, which does a great job of demonstrating exactly how you can use flows. This flow is used for getting a stock's pricing information and comparing the price over the course of 3 weeks. The first action in this flow is to retrieve the stock pricing information from the API. We have two variables in this request, the stock ticker symbol, which is essentially a unique shortcode that identifies the stock, and we also have the API key, because this endpoint requires us to have one. If the GET request is successful, we're passing the response data into this logic block, which is going to get the prices for each week and put them into a list. After that, we're splitting off into two flows, which we can use to produce the separate outcomes that we need. In the top flow, we're turning the values into an array and then outputting them into a table and a chart to showcase the prices for the past 3 weeks. In the bottom flow, we're using a logic block to compare the price of the stock with the previous week and output if the stock price is higher or lower this week. Let's give it a run so you can see for yourself. So now that I've given you a basic example of what you can do with flows, let's create our own. This year, I'm setting myself a goal of learning something new every week. I'd say that I'm a good developer, but there's still so much for me to learn, especially considering the recent advancements in AI. So I've created a Notion database that contains a list of topics that I'd like to learn. I'm not going to show you my actual Notion database, so I've created this example database just for the purpose of this video. For this flow, I want to get a list of all of the topics in my database. If one of these page entries is empty, I want to ask ChatGPT for a recommended roadmap to learn the topic. Then we can add the roadmap content back into the database so that if I decide to learn this topic, I have a nice little guide waiting for me. I've already pre-configured some existing API endpoints for this using my own Notion collection. And I've also got an OpenAI collection which I found on Postman's public API network. Now let's create this flow. Let's start off by creating a new flow and then adding in our first request. The first step for this flow is to get a list of all of the entries in the Notion database. We're doing this so that we can loop through them to perform the roadmap generation task on each one. Let's add in a select block so that we can easily access the data that's inside of the results array. Before we go any further, I'm going to add in an output block so that we can see the response from the Notion API. Let's run that and see what we get. Each one of these items represents a document that is being stored in the Notion database. We can see here that this one is for the topic of graph databases. Now that we've got a list of the documents in the database, we can add in a for block which will iterate through each of the elements in an array, exactly how it works in JavaScript. So everything that we add into the flow after this will be run on each of the documents that were retrieved in the initial request. Let's add in a new request which is going to get the contents of a page, making sure that we pass the ID of the page, which can be found in the page object from the for block. If this response is successful, we're going to add in an evaluate block, which is going to allow us to add in some basic code logic. In this case, we're going to check how many blocks there are in the Notion page. Also, Postman has this pretty nifty feature called Postbot. So if you're not sure how you need to manipulate the data to get the result that you need, you can ask Postbot to do it for you. If the Notion page has 0 blocks, it means that it's empty. And if the page has 1 or more blocks, we know that there is already content on that page. Next, we're going to create an if block, which is going to allow us to check if the number of blocks is 0. If it is, we're going to continue with our flow. But if the page already has some content, we're not going to do anything. Now let's add in another request. This time we're going to be asking the OpenAI API to generate a roadmap for learning a given topic. You can see here in the request configuration that I've already created my prompt and included a variable for the topic. We can then pass the topic to the request by selecting the topic in the JSON data from the for block. Now all that's left to do is to take the successfully generated roadmap content and insert it back into the Notion document. So let's add in that final API request which will enable us to send the generated roadmap back to Notion. We just need to select the correct variable in the response from OpenAI and make sure that the page ID is also being provided. And now for the big reveal. Let's click run. You can see here that the flow has generated roadmaps for each one of the topics and inserted them back into my Notion database. And just like that, in under a few minutes, we've created a simple workflow which involves sending and requesting data from multiple API endpoints. Well everybody, that's it for today's video. I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, please do leave a like down below, hit the subscribe button if you're new, and tap the bell icon to get notified every time I post a new video. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. See ya.